Welcome to Mining the Media, providing nuggets of news and cutting-edge questions and answers, minus the political blather. Here are your hosts, G.K. Allen and Dave Jeffers.
Well, hey, it's Dave Jeffers here, the co-host and producer of Mining the Media. And G.K. Allen and I just got off talking to each other, just doing a little brainstorm, and thought it might be fun just to share that with y'all. So without further ado, here it is.
Yeah. Now, there's a couple of things that I was looking at that, I said, kid you and myself about having a Swiss cheese brain. If I don't write it down, I forget it.
Yeah.
A couple of points I just want to make. We can have them in the can to insert maybe as a segue, not using a music segue. I can just say, look, before I forget, here's a thought or something like that.
Okay.
There's two things I wanted to mention, which I've discussed with you. They're very brief, but I think they're important.
Okay, go ahead. Let's hear it.
Do it now? Okay.
Sure.
I really do believe there should be a law about this. Page one of any major newspaper, someone is charged with something, okay? And later on, the case is thrown out of court, it's proven to be false, whatever. Perhaps they go to trial and they wind up being vindicated. That's often on page 16. Anytime there's a correction or an apology, they don't put it where it should be. Something's on page one that makes you look bad, and you wind up in the end looking good. That item should be right where the original item was, on the same section of the same page, be front pages.
Well, I hear what you're saying, but freedom of the press.
I know, but what I'm saying is ethically.
Well, yeah, if they had ethics, they would do that. That's the problem, Greg. They don't have, these people are unethical. That's why I'm looking forward to getting both Cal and Bill tomorrow. And by the way, they're both confirmed, but I'm looking forward to getting them both because I want to get their viewpoints on that kind of stuff, because that's what Cal's already talked about from what I've read in this book. And Bill, he knows what the founders meant.
The other thing I want to mention is, and this is a suggestion to anybody who's being interviewed for any reason, especially if you're being interviewed by somebody you don't necessarily trust, have your own recording device.
Oh, yeah.
So that you can prove to them they said this or asked that, or if they claim, they misquote you or whatever, you may have made a mistake. So you'd want to apologize if you did. If they screwed up, you want to let them know. It's really good as the safety factor. If you're going to be recorded, like it's a conservative, if you're going to record for some liberal newspaper, you say, look, I've got my own recording device here for my own safety and yours. Yeah. And if they're not willing to allow that, you don't need to do the interview because you know what they're out after.
100%. 100% agree with that. I mean, you're a fool if you don't. In this day and age, you're a fool if you don't. And if you're on camera, I might have my friend there with my iPhone recording the whole thing that I'm being recorded on their television cameras. I'm going to have somebody on the iPhone recording it and saying, hey, I'm not going to send this out anywhere, but it's going to be in my private vault so that if you guys try to do something, I'm going to have the ability to protect myself and defend myself.
And also, frankly, if you should make a mistake and you're wrong about something, if you're man enough, you say, look, I was wrong about this.
Absolutely.
There's proof in both directions.
Yes, absolutely. Absolutely.
Well, what do you see right now on the screen?
I see the Martians. I love it.
I love it. And this little kid was playing at the dollar store with it. And it was so cool. I mean, hearing the sound, and I'm thinking, this would be perfect for the show at some point.
Yeah, and it's okay. I don't know where he got that from, but no telling. Well, that's good. I like it.
Well, the thing is, years ago, when I first started getting into print media, because I was in print media long before broadcast media, and I was writing specifically for a major daily newspaper up north. And I was interviewing Seals and Crofts, very, very big at the time.
Me and my wife.
In this particular paper, I would do interviews with Kenny Loggins or others prior to their appearance in this particular market, right? So if they were going to be there over the weekend, on the Wednesday or Thursday edition would be my interview with them, right? So I interviewed both Seals and Crofts. And at the time, there was some controversy because they were members of the Baha'i faith. And I forget which one of them made a remark, but it was very much a self-effacing, humorous remark that made them look like the good guys who knew how to deal with a controversial issue, deal with it intelligently, and use some humor. Because humor is a wonderful medicine.
Absolutely.
Sometimes you can make a point better with a joke than with a dart. And I inserted because it needed to be said, because I was looking at the copy, because it was print, right? And this is long before the internet, back in the 70s. And I had to insert, in parenthesis, after that remark, they quipped, because I thought it was very important to know they quipped. Because if you read it cold, it almost looked obnoxious. But if you knew they had tongue in cheek, it came out very differently.
Yeah, and sometimes that
the editor removed that remark. Sills and Croft blew a stack, and I don't blame them. I apologize to them, and I'm not naming names. But that particular instance got me from leaving that paper, telling the editor what he could do and where he could put it, and I wound up spending 21 years with their competition.
Wow, good for you.
Yep.
Yeah.
It's amazing with print media, especially. You've got to be so careful. Or if you're interviewed by NBC and you're a conservative, you have to be careful because they doctor tapes something fierce.
They're terrible.
Everybody who is an old-fashioned, there's still a lot of, this bugs me, Dave. There's a lot of Democrats out there who remain Democrats, who are not progressives or mainstream Democrats. And there's a lot of Republicans and a lot of independents out there. Most people actually have a heck of a lot in common. And I think part of the problem we have right now is the media is basically playing a giant game of let's you and him fight.
You're right.
And if we realize that most liberals and most conservatives and most independents love their family, work hard, and are decent people in their day in and day out life, they have a lot in common with each other. Yeah. Now we're getting to a point where the media, it's pathetic when you think about it, Dave, when people are talking about race or people are talking about gender as that's the thing that makes you. What they're really saying, especially with gender, is this is the stereotype of what a man or a woman is. This is the stereotype. And actually, they're saying you must conform to the stereotype, which is sort of contradictory to the freedom they claim they want.
Yeah. No, it's what Eric Erickson said, you will be made to care. And the way the media is gone and the way our politics gone, it's what Steve Deace describes as the balkanization of America.
It's a shame.
And it is. Speaking of...
Now, in your life, now you spent time in that part of the world. Weren't you in Kosovo?
Yeah. I went to
Kosovo. You saw some of the ugly.
I went to Kosovo 3 times. I went to Bosnia, I think twice. The thing about Bosnia, well, even driving through Kosovo, the thing about Bosnia, we were flying from a major airfield up to a camp, and we flew through these valleys in a helicopter, and just the destruction, wholesale destruction of villages, completely wiped out. And I remember one time, I don't know if it was my way back home. I think I was coming back from Kosovo, and we would usually fly out of Skopje, Macedonia. So you take a bus or something. Usually it was about an hour ride. And I remember looking at some of these villages and just saying, man, this was not God. This was not what God had in mind when he made the human race. It was so devastating to see. I can't even imagine what that's like. Then thankfully, my last time I went there before I retired, I went there in probably March. I took our new command sergeant major over there, and it was springtime. So the thaw had come, and it was amazing how much, because now the the main war was pretty much over with, and NATO and the UN were bringing in lots of supplies, and these people were literally by hand rebuilding their lives. I remember driving through this one village, and some of the homes that had been destroyed were already being repaired, and these people were doing it on their own, just rebuilding their own houses. It's just like, we have no idea what life is like, man.
But what's so very, very sad in things like this, when people are killing each other over the way they pray or who they pray to or how they pray, whatever religion we're talking about, your hatred, this is just one man's opinion, if your hatred toward another religion is such that it gets to the violent level, unless if you're defending yourself, I mean, I don't think God wants us killing our fellow man.
Of course he doesn't. He does.
Like most people from my generation, in my college days, briefly, I was a liberal too.
Yeah, I was too, very much so.
And I was thinking of, the typical things he did back then. I think to some extent, when it comes to religion, anything of an intellectual, political nature, philosophical nature, if at some point you make a change, if it comes from with you for the right reasons, it's a good thing. I mean, if you go from being a liberal to a conservative, or from not being religious at all to being religious, whatever it happens to be, I think it's very important if you put your ego aside and sometimes realize, well, maybe there's a different path. I don't think we're meant necessarily to be on one specific path. I think sometimes we need to get off the exit and hang out at the access road.
The Bible says that pride comes before a fall. So yeah, you have to get over your ego. You were talking about laughter and just being self-effacing. Proverbs 15:13 says this: a merry heart makes a cheerful countenance, but by sorrow of the heart, the spirit is broken. And that's what you see with these liberals who just can't laugh at themselves. Their hearts are so.
Comedy is dead.
Oh, it is.
Comedy is dead right now. And the fact is, two of the presidents I admired most in my life, Ronald Reagan and John Kennedy, and they both benefited from a self-effacing sense of humor, from a little bit of that Irish charm, because the Irish are brilliant.
Oh, yeah.
Much like the Jews. And isn't it interesting that so many people, and Southerners, black and white in this country, people who come from a people who were defeated or picked on, often create the best humorists.
Yeah.
Because they know what it's like to be picked on. They know what it's like to be the mouse, not the cat.
Yeah.
And I think to a great extent, what we're seeing now is, in both political parties, for the most part, there's nobody capable of genuinely being humorous in a real sense. A lot of what passes for humor now is just kind of a snarly attitude.
Yeah.
And you ask almost any comedian who's had a long record of being a successful comedian, and to a great extent, they avoid the colleges now because these kids don't have humor. And I find it scary having a grandson who's a college student right now. When I went to college, and it's going to sound like, oh, when I was a man, young man, blah, blah, blah. But the fact is, I was exposed to all kinds of professors in college. I had liberals and conservatives. I had a gay professor when it wasn't at all fashionable to talk about it, the whole bit. And I benefited from having a diverse group of instructors. We had a diverse group of students, and we didn't go to college to be in lockstep.
Right.
At the Chinese military. It's what you have right now in our college campuses. And I've told you this, Dave, in some of our texts and with others I communicate with in my family, so on and so forth, that I say it somewhat tongue-in-cheek, but there's unfortunately some truth in it. That if I want news, I go to Babylon B. And if I want satire, I go to CNN.
Yeah. Yeah, it's become, that's what it's become.
It's a shame, because CNN used to be pretty good.
They were. Hey, I remember when they first came out, I watched them religiously.
I was on CNN when they had Showbiz Today. The other guests were Tipper Gore and Frank Zappa.
Ah,
I was on in my capacity as a critic for the paper I was writing.
man, I got to find that footage.
Who knows?
I
You
got to
probably
find that.
just, probably wound up on the internet.
I'm going to find that footage. I'm going to find that footage.
Broadcast. Yeah. Yeah. Many years ago. What a group. Me, Tipper Gore, and Frank Zappa. I mean, you're talking about an odd couple or an odd trio.
That's hilarious. Let me write myself I need to write myself a note so I don't forget to do that.
Back in the 80s at some point, I'm terrible. Right now, I'm at a point right now, if I get the decade right, I feel accomplished. Oh, yeah, well, sometimes back in, whatever decade. It's funny because my oldest male friend, obviously, as you know, my brother died of cancer a little over a year ago.
Right.
And he was my best for, brothers. And, I taught him how to play drums when we were kids. We both were professional drummers, both involved with a couple of the same bands over the years, so on and so forth. And my oldest male friend, who was not a brother, is my songwriting partner, Rafael Fuentes. Met him in music class at community college in New York City in September of 1967. And you're talking about how the way people meet each other and how one person leads to another person. So I meet Rafael, in music class. He gets to meet my brother. They form a band called Baby Moon. Baby Moon are regulars at CBGB's in the mid-70s at the birth of punk and the birth of new wave, and in fact, frequently played with the Ramones and frequently played with Blondie and Tough Darts and Television and a lot of others. They eventually became Diamond Dupree, and they backed up Ronnie Spector on her first solo album, so on and so forth. Raphael and I wrote songs that she recorded. My brother and Raphael wrote a song that she recorded, so on and so forth. The album's called Siren. And then from that meeting at community college, not only did Glenn connect with Raphael, but he wound up in the French Cooking Blues Band for millions of years in New York City. They were regulars at B.B. King's and became members of the Blues Hall of Fame for New York State. So very comparable to what you're talking about geopolitically in your life. Musically, from meeting Raphael music class at community college, my brother's career blossomed. His career, Raphael's career, blossomed. All kinds of friendships became, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
And it's a very, very similar kind of thing. And it is amazing to me because in a sense, it's almost like, might sound corny, but it's almost like you're a plant a seed, and other plants get planted.
Well, that's exactly what happens. And would Raphael come on the show?
I think if we're talking music and
we should,
because we were both between, and the funny thing is, you've heard me say it many times, Dave. Glenn died February 9th, 2020, and he really was my best male friend for virtually my entire life, and I loved being his big brother, and we had so many wonderful memories. And one of the things I miss most about him is he, even though he had a problem at one point in his life with hard living, shall we say, living the rock and roll life.
Right.
He managed to get himself out of it very effectively, actually. But despite all that, he had a better memory than me. So if I remember seeing Spirit and the Kinks and the Bonzo Dog Band at the Fillmore East, Glenn would remember it in either greater detail.
Yeah.
Or correct me if I flip-flop. Well, Fleetwood Mac was the band and so on, and King Crimson was the opening act or whatever.
Yeah.
That sort of thing. And I no longer have my sort of combination of encyclopedia and diary back me up. And it's something I miss very, very much. I frequently, when I'm watching something on TV that relates to someone we played with, because we opened up for the likes of James Brown, for instance, 4 nights in Greenwich Village, Lone Star Cafe, probably the best club New York ever saw for new music. Maybe one of these days I'll tell you the story about. Maybe I can do it now. Should I do it now?
Sure.
The weekend with James Brown. Why not? We can all edit this stuff, and I think one of the things that's working for us is these kind of conversations. Because they really do come. There's no cheat sheet.
What I'm already sitting here thinking of is publishing this as Minding the Media Brainstorming.
Yeah. So anyway, Diamond Dupree, really good band. We were regulars of the Lone Star, played with Hot Tuna, the spinoff of the Jefferson Airplane and all that. And one weekend, James Brown, who was out of New York City for many years, hadn't played in New York for a while. And Lone Star Cafe, to anybody who knows the Greenwich Village, New York City music scene, the 80s in particular, was the club in town. It really was. The Bottom Line and the Lone Star Cafe were phenomenal places. So James Brown is doing 2 shows on a Friday night, 2 shows on a Saturday night. Diamond Debris, our band. Raphael's the lead singer with guitars, responsible for probably 90% of the material. My brother co-wrote some of the stuff with him. My brother, drummer in the band, very good at arranging, so on and so forth. So I had the connection. I managed them for a while as well. Not through all of their career, but for a moment in time, I did. So we're playing with James Brown. James gets up from the South. I don't know if it was Georgia or South Carolina, in his bus, his James Brown bus. Now, if you know anything about Greenwich Village, like an old English area of Manhattan, because the streets are narrow. Okay, It's an old part of Manhattan Island. So here's this big bus blocking all, barely gets into the street. Out comes James Brown with his wife, his masseuse, his minister, and his band.
His what?
One of the great moments in my brother's life.
The last part cut out. His what?
His band.
His band. Okay.
Okay. Yeah. And one of the greatest compliments my brother ever got was after the first set, because we did 2 sets. After the first set, James Brown's drummer came up to my brother and said, "You're really good. You're really good." Because Glenn was a great swing drummer. He had that Charlie Watts jazz kind of influence, as well as being a great rock and roll drummer. And we got encores 3 of the 4 shows, which is very difficult to do if you're the opening act or a legend. Because the people there primarily that see you, we would have had a 4th, except it was running late. And the James Brown folks said, "Look, we're running late, be mine." It's no, we understand. But 3 of the 4 shows, we got encores. One of the greatest moments in our life was James Brown, Wilson Pickett, and Otis Redding, the gold standard. If any young person is going to be hearing us at any point, bear with me, because this is one of the few things I can tell you that I know I'm right about. Every good artist who's got the talent should have a genuine producer produce their recordings. Don't self-produce, especially early on. Get the right producer. The wrong producer can mess you up.
Yeah.
You could be a very good producer for one kind of music, but not for another kind of music. I saw this happen to a band that my band Diamond Debris used to play for. I played with in Atlanta, Georgia. There was a really good band called Fort Knox. They got a deal with a major label. One of Thin Lizzy's producers produced their debut album and butchered it. He was good for Thin Lizzy, but he wasn't good for Fort Knox. But what I'm saying is, if there's any young musician or band or solo artist, any form of music, there's 10,000 forms of pop music under that big umbrella, you're better off if you can find the right producer, because they can hear things that make you the magical side of music, and they can also hear the tragical side of your music. And that's why almost every great album had a producer that mattered. And of course, the classic example is early Elton John with Gus Dudgeon, and obviously the Beatles with George Martin. And they brought a lot to the artists they worked with.
I'm also thinking of Ted Templeton with the
great
with the Doobie Brothers. He just, I mean, even the eponymous album, which I never heard about, it came out in 1971. I never heard it. I went out and bought it because I saw it was available. It's now becoming, I mean, The Captain and Me, I think, is my favorite album that they ever put out. I think a lot of it has to do with, it came out when I was a junior, almost a senior, and we listened to it till we burnt the 8 tracks up. But their first album is quickly becoming one of my favorites because it's such raw musical talent that
they knew how to play multiple guitars, right?
Yeah, they just learned how.
Guitars never clashed with each other. They always worked well together.
Right. Hey, you know what? I have an idea for an episode. We won't do it every time because we are going to do Music Memory Lane or whatever we want to call it. But I'm going to do this every once in a while. I'm going to throw out some band names that I've either seen or that I liked, and just impromptu, you're going to riff on them.
good or bad.
Yeah. I just want GK's take, and I'll just throw some out there, and then and if you've never heard him or never saw him or never you can just say that, yeah, move on, I got nothing there, and then we'll just go through them, because I think that's a lot of fun. How we just sometimes we just jump on something on a song or a band, and because Glenn was the diary, but you are the encyclopedia. Because I just told Karen, it was either last night or this morning, I said, Greg's knowledge of music is encyclopedic.
Up to the year 2000.
Yeah.
For the last 20 years, and I'm going to sound like an old geezer here, but we are not living in a Renaissance age for any form of pop music.
The only music that I would talk about from 2000 on, and the bands that I've seen live are all Christian.
I haven't heard any. I used to love reggae. It puts me to sleep now. It just seems like everything's become so derivative.
Yeah.
It's like, okay, well, Free did it better years ago, or the Stones did it better, or whatever. And I think to a great extent, bear with me, the top 10 records, it's almost like that old thing from science class that a gas will occupy the space it's given. The top 10 needs something to occupy the space it's given. It needs a top 10. You look at any of the Billboard yearly summaries of the top 100 songs. Look for 1965, 1966, 1967, 1968. 30 to 40% of those songs are classics.
Yeah.
And most of them are songs that actually can stand alone. Because if you remember, in the glory days of the 60s to the early 80s especially, there were a lot of songs that jazz musicians would take. There were a lot of songs that someone from a different style, like a Mel Torme, would record.
Yeah.
Because the song itself was so good. Yeah. I call most of contemporary pop music, I don't call it songs anymore, I call it sonic structure. It's an excuse for a lead singer to sing. They need words, but most of these songs on their own don't hold up. When you realize that there are golden ages for everything, you think of the French Impressionists, you think of the Renaissance, whatever, the big band era, Broadway post-World War II, and in the 50s, almost every great classical Broadway musical came from that era. And the 60s and 70s for album rock in particular. And we're just living in an age right now. And I think part of it is, it's saying this, I could be wrong, but it just seems like the vulgarization and the dumbing down of our culture is affecting the quality of our art. We don't have a ton of really great films anymore. We don't have a ton of really great new bands. It's really a shame. And bear with me, because I'm going to rant now, but this is something I've believed in forever, and you're going to have to bear with me on this, Dave. If I don't say it now, I'll forget it. I'm a big believer in what I call G.K. or Greg's theory number one about specifically what? Music, about art.
Art, yeah.
Because it's the thing I know best, okay, is music. It needs friction. By that I mean great music or great paintings, any form of creativity needs friction. It needs to be up against something. And again, bear with me. Much of the great pop music of the 20th century came from the following groups. Came from poor white Southerners, poor Black Southerners. In the Brill Building in New York, it came from Jewish American immigrants, and it came from British musicians in the early 60s and on. They all had something in common in that all of them, to some extent, were downtrodden or on the bottom rung or near the bottom rung of the social ladder. And when you go back to the British bands, boom. And by the way, my buddy Charlie Comer, who was the best publicist in the history of rock and roll, is the man who coined the phrase Merseybeat. He worked with the Beatles on their first tour, then was a publicist about everybody who mattered in New York City. But the fact of the matter is, the musicians came mostly from a poor working class background to maybe entry level middle class for the most part. They were up against something. when we look at most of the soul artists that we love, or most of the rockabilly or rock and roll guys, whether they're black or white, it doesn't matter. Elvis came from a hard scrabble background. Otis Redding came from a hard scrabble background. And I think to some extent, great art needs to be up against something so sparks are created. That's why there's not a lot of great art coming out of Switzerland. Yeah, well, you think about it. I mean, Van Gogh was brilliant. He had psychological tricks.
Yeah, yeah.
You know, Beethoven was going deaf. He wrote the most perfect piece of music. In fact, bear with me on this one. If God ever composed anything himself, he did it through Beethoven. It's called Beethoven's Ninth.
Oh, yeah.
Because it is the most perfect piece of music ever written in any art form.
Well, Beethoven,
anything with decibels.
Beethoven had a strong relationship with God. But
it's a funny thing. When it comes to reading, I really am a nonfiction guy. I love history books and I love biography.
Yeah. Well, that's what got me started reading with, like, today's Willie Mays' 90th birthday. That was the first book I ever read, was the Willie Mays story. And I was actually looking for the book today. I found one. I'm like, no, that couldn't have been it. The one I found, it was written in 1960, 60 or 63, 63, 62. No, it was 60 because he had been playing baseball for he was still in New York and he was playing baseball. He'd been playing baseball since 54. I think Shapiro was the writer. But I remember reading that book. When I told Karen I finally found it, they only want $176 for an old used paperback. But I told her, I said, hey, if I was a rich man, I would buy that book just for the memory.
Well, let me interrupt you there.
I started reading.
You grew up in San Francisco, right?
I grew up north of it, yeah.
Right, but that general part of the world.
Yeah.
If Willie Mays played in a ballpark other than Candlestick Park, it's so obvious he must have lost. I'm not kidding when I say this, because I used to be a baseball fan. I'm not anymore, but I used to be big time. Even had a job one time in the Kansas City Royals organization. But the fact of the matter is, he probably lost 75 to 100 home runs due to the wind at Candlestick Park.
Well, Tito Fuentes on MLB.com was telling the story of when he came up, he was crushing home runs in the minor league. So everybody wanted to watch him, in batting practice. The rookie coming up, he hit like 20 home runs in AAA or something. So they're all at the batting cage. Willie McCovey, Willie Mays, Orlando Cepeda, all these future Hall of Famers. So he's saying, well, I gotta show these guys up. And so he crushes a pitch to left field, and it just dies. And it hardly didn't even make it to the warning track. And he's like, oh, I must have not got that all, and they all laughed at him. He goes, no, son, here at the stick, you gotta learn to pull the ball. So they all learned how to hit to right field. Because if you hit the left field, the wind's knocking it down because that's coming straight off the bay. So you had to hit the home runs to right field. Willie Mays hit him to right. Orlando Cepeda, who was a right-handed hitter, he'd hit him to right. I mean, I seen Willie hit one over left field a bunch of times. Sometimes he hit pitches that no park would hold.
You know what's amazing when you think of Willie Mays, Mickey Mantle, and Duke Snider all played center field in major league ballparks at the same time in the same city, New York City.
Yeah.
Three of the greatest center fielders in the history of mankind were in New York all at the same time.
Yeah.
And Mickey Mantle's power from both sides of the plate, amazing. Can you imagine if his body was in better shape and he drank a little bit less?
Yeah, he still hit one of the farthest home runs ever recorded. He hit it out of Yankee Stadium into the parking lot.
Yeah.
But
yep. Well, I was raised on the Brooklyn Dodgers because my dad, the first game I ever saw was a little boy, took me to Ebbets Field. I think I told you the story before. And it was the St. Louis Cardinals and the Brooklyn Dodgers. Stan Musial beat the Dodgers almost single-handedly that game. On the way out of the stadium, Bob said to me, "You want to here? I got Jackie Robinson."
And I told you that you shouldn't have given that to your brother for self-defense. That thing would be worth so much money right now.
I gave it to my brother because Glenn was living in a place that was a little funky, and he wanted something that wasn't the gun.
You want to talk about some a windfall of financial gain. If you could put that thing on eBay on Jackie Robinson Day, and I'm telling you, you would get hundreds of dollars, if not thousands, for it because people would be bidding on that thing.
Well, when I hear the name Jackie Robinson, Junior Gilliam, Carl Furillo, Clem Labine, Bill Hodges, and to me, the greatest catchers in my lifetime. Again, I haven't been a baseball fan for some years now, but when I was, it would be between Johnny Bench and Roy Campanella and Yogi Berra.
Yeah, Johnny Bench.
There's the triple crown of fantastic catchers.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely.
Well, I think it's time for us to wrap this up. We should point out, if anyone's ever going to see this particular moment, Dave is the technical genius of what we're doing. I'm one of those people that if I put batteries in the right way in a flashlight, I get a sense of accomplishment.
Well, that's why when you told me that you had sent where is it here? Oh, got the mic plugged in, see you at 7:30. I went awesome. And then I sent, I'm really proud of you, the GIF, and you went, wise guy. That's why you're described as the creator and I'm the producer.
Well, yeah, because I mean, you really know your stuff, and you know, your professional line of work requires a certain amount of detail.
Yeah.
Well, I'll tell you something. I love the logo behind you that together. The listeners and viewers, they put it together, not me. I mean, I approved of it, but they put it all together.
Well, actually,
it's really nice.
Actually, I hired somebody who came up with some different. I told him what I wanted, and he's done work for me before. He's an e-lancer.
You tell me I just lied?
No.
Oh, okay.
I gave them the concept, and then he sent me some different things, and so yeah, I know good. I hire good people, and they're e-lancers. So you can get these. They're called not e-lancers. They're freelancers. They're e-lancers, and they'll do it. You can get them to do anything fantastic for you.
Well, it's a different world, and I'll leave you on this because it connects to what you're saying. My youngest grandkid, ever since the age of 3, knew what to do with a tablet.
Yeah, that's my grandson.
And she would watch Peppa Pig and all these other British shows, and early on, she had a little bit of a British accent on certain things because she was watching at the age of 3 and 4 so many of the British cartoons, and every so often you hear her say George or Mummy.
Yeah.
And watching her go around the you know, I mean, it was just the younger generation. A lot of things I don't like about the current younger generation, but give them all the credit in the world. They know how to do the electronic stuff. They were raised on it.
Yeah, my grandson's that way. Well, we'll call this a night. Looking forward to our interview of Cal Thomas and William Federer. And yes, and strange things may happen. You never know. All right, friend. We'll see you tomorrow.
You got it. Bye-bye.
Bye.